About 10 years ago, I took on the task to teach global development to Swedish undergraduate students. That was after having spent about 20 years together with African institutions studying hunger in Africa. So I was sort of expected to know a little about the world. And I started in our medical university, Karolinska Institute, an undergraduate course called Global Health. But when you get that opportunity, you get a little nervous. I thought these students coming to us actually have the highest grade you can get in Swedish college system. So I thought maybe they know everything I'm going to teach them about. So I did a pre-test when they came. And one of the questions from which I learned a lot was this one. Which country has the highest child mortality of these 5 pairs? And I put them together so that in each pair of country, one has twice the child mortality of the other. And this means that it's much bigger the difference than the uncertainty of the data. I won't put you at a test here, but it's Turkey, which is highest there, Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results of the Swedish students. I did it so I got a confidence interval, which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. And that means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is China. And this is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family. And third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We start the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there. But now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world. Let me make a comparison directly between United States of America and Vietnam. 1964. America had small families and long life. Vietnam had large families and short lives, and this is what happens. The data during the war indicate that even with all the death, there was an improvement of life expectancy. By the end of the year, the family planning started in Vietnam, and they went for smaller families, and the United States up there is getting for longer life, keeping family size, and in the 80s now, they give up communist planning and they go for market economy, and it moves faster even than social life. And today we have in Vietnam the same life expectancy and the same family size here in Vietnam 2003 as in United States 1974 by the end of the war. I think we all, if we don't look in the data, we underestimate the tremendous change in Asia, which was in social change before we saw the economical change.
I'm sure many of you are familiar with Gapminder. Everybody knows gapminder.org. Does everybody know gapminder.org? Is there anyone who is not familiar with this? Okay, there is a guy named Hans Rosling, and if you go to TED.com, Technology, Entertainment, Design, the TED conferences take place every year down in Monterey, and they invite about, I don't know, 40 or 50 of the smartest people, give them 40 minutes to talk about anything that they want. A guy named Hans Rosling has come, and by rights should be giving the most boring talk that you've ever seen. Because what he has is he's collected 60 years worth of United Nations data about child mortality, gross national product, family size, you name it, any kind of boring piece of demographic data from every country in the world for 65 years. He's been able to come up with a single plot, which you can actually see at gapminder.org. The guy gives a talk. It's just magnificent because for the first time, we are suddenly visually understanding why globalization is taking place and why it is that China as an economic power is rising, and why India as an economic power is rising, and why the United States as an economic power is relatively shrinking or relatively staying in the same place compared to some of the others. It's miraculous, and he's got all this data. The guy's magnificent. That's what I mean by truly a why chart. It answers the big questions, and I'd really strongly recommend that you go take a look at it.
It went on quite well, and this is what happens. You can see how China is the red big bubble, the blue there is India, and they go over all this when I try to be a little more serious this year and showing you how things really changed. And it's Africa which stands out as the problem down here, doesn't it? Large families still, and the HIV epidemic brought down the countries like this. This is more or less on what we saw last year, and this is how it will go on into the future. And I will talk on, is this possible? Because you see now, I presented statistics that doesn't exist. Because this is where we are. Will it be possible that this will happen? I cover my lifetime here, you know. I expect to live 100 years. And if I go back in time, I've added some historical statistics. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Not so much statistics 100 years ago. Some countries still have statistics. We are looking down in the archive, and where we are down into 1820, there is only Austria and Sweden that can produce numbers. But they were down here. They had $1,000 per person per year, and they lost 1/5 of their kids before the first birthday. So this is what happens in the world. If we play the entire world, how they got slowly richer and richer, and they add statistics. Isn't it beautiful when they get statistics? You see the importance of that? And here, children don't live longer. The last century, 1870, was bad for the kids in Europe because most of the statistics is Europe. It was only by the turn of the century that more than 90% of the children survived the first year. This is India coming up with the first data from India, and this is the United States moving away here, earning more money, and we will soon see China coming up in the very far end corner here, and it moves up with Mao Zedong getting health, not getting so rich. There he died, then Deng Xiaoping brings money, it moves this way over here, and the bubbles keeps moving up there, and this is what the world looks like today. Let me show you my own sort of family history. We've made these graphs here, and this is the same thing, money down there and health, you know, and this is my family. This is Sweden, 1830, when my great-great-grandma was born. Sweden was like Sierra Leone today. And this is when great-grandma was born, 1863. And Sweden was like Mozambique. And this is when my grandma was born, 1891. She took care of me as a child. So I'm not talking about statistics now. Now it's oral history in my family. That's when I believe statistics, when it's grandma-verified statistics, you know. I think it's the best way of verifying historical statistics. Sweden was like Ghana. It's interesting to see the enormous diversity within sub-Saharan Africa. I told you last year, I'll tell you again. My mother was born in Egypt, and who am I? I'm the Mexican in the family. And my daughter, she was born in Chile, and the granddaughter was born in Singapore, now the healthiest country on this earth. It bypassed Sweden about 2 to 3 years ago with better child survival. But they're very small, you know. They're so close to the hospital, we can never beat them out in these forests. But homage to Singapore. Singapore are the best one. Africa has not done bad. In 50 years, they've gone from pre-medieval situation to a very decent 100 years ago Europe with a functioning national state. I would say that sub-Saharan Africa have done best in the world during the last 50 years because we don't consider where they came from. It's this stupid concept of developing countries which put us Argentina and Mozambique together 50 years ago and said that Mozambique did worse. We have to know a little more about the world. I have a neighbor who knows 200 types of wine. He knows everything. He knows the name of the grape, the temperature, and everything. I only know 2 types of wine, red and white. But my neighbor only knows 2 types of countries, industrialized and developing, and I know 200. I know about the small data about the. You can do that.
And finally, it's okay for the speaker, that's the good news, to fake intellectual capacity. If I don't understand something, I can just say etc., etc. You'll all stay with me. It's perfectly fine. Now, let's go to the visuals. The most obvious visual thing on stage is the speaker, and analysis shows if you want to be among the most favorite TED speakers, you should let your hair grow a little bit longer than average. Make sure you wear your glasses and be slightly more dressed up than the average TED speaker. Slides are okay, though you might consider going for props. And now the most important thing, that is the mood on stage. Color plays a very important role. Color closely correlates with the ratings that talks get on the website. For example, fascinating talks contain a statistically high amount of exactly this blue color, much more than the average TED Talk. Ingenious TED Talks, much more of this green color, etc., etc. Now, personally, I think I'm not the first one who has done this analysis, but I'll leave this to your good judgment.
So the seemingly impossible is possible. Even African countries can achieve this. And I've shown you the chart that the seemingly impossible is possible. And remember, please remember my main message. That is this. The seemingly impossible is possible. We can have a good world. I showed you the charts. I proved it in the PowerPoint. And I think I will convince you also by culture. Bring me my sword. Sword swallowing is from ancient India. It's a cultural expression that for thousands of years has inspired human beings to think beyond the obvious. And I will now prove to you that the seemingly impossible is possible by taking this piece of steel, solid steel. This is the army bayonet from the Swedish army, 1850, in the last year we had war. And it's all solid steel, you can hear here. And I'm going to take this blade of steel and push it down through my body of blood and flesh and prove to you that the seemingly impossible is possible. Can I request a moment of absolute silence?
necessarily so. It ain't necessarily so. The things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. Little David was...
What kind of woman turns you on? The reason why I'm going to admit it tonight is because so many women here is my kind of woman. My kind of woman is in the house tonight. I love them women. I love them women. What kind of woman turns you on? I love them women.
Women who lived without men, except for a few days each year. Who lived in a country of their own, when women were women.
Thank you very much.